Good morning, everyone. I am very excited to learn about sake, but share a great sake producer in Brooklyn. I was lucky enough to meet them up in Hudson and High Hattingly lines. And here we go. It may take a few minutes to connect, Brian. It depends on. Um, but yeah, we're going to talk about Brooklyn sake and how they make it. Brian, hello.
Hey, what's going on, Jeff? How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I never know how long it takes to connect, but it was very fast this morning, so good.
Uh, good.
Um,
How's the reception? Is it good?
yeah, very good,
Uh,
and it's not a lot of background noise. I see you're at the facility, so let's get right into it because I have so many questions. But can we? I want to hear about how you got where you are, like a little of your backstory, and maybe tie it in with how Brooklyn Kura came about.
yeah, my pleasure. So myself and our brewer Brandon Dawn met in Japan in 2013. We were there coincidentally to attend the same wedding. All right. And for those of you watching that haven't visited Japan, if you get the opportunity to,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a remarkable place. But if you're into craft beverages and you wander into a sake brewery, this story will make a lot more sense to you. But before that, I used to manage a product and technology organization for American Express, and Brandon was a research scientist and chemist. And so in 2013, we met each other at this mutual friend's wedding, and like I mentioned, just wandering Japan for about 2 weeks, visiting places where we could drink and eat all the fantastic things that are available there. But one of the things that struck us the most was the availability and affordability of sake and the quality that was everywhere, and how regionally and locally focused it was, and the level of craftsmanship that went into it. And so coming back, I was kind of in the market for a hobby. And so Brandon and I decided to try and make sake in our home. So myself in Brooklyn in my dining room, which I was lucky enough to have, and Brandon in his basement in Portland, Oregon. And what I'd say is, the quality of what we were producing was higher than we expected, and I was fortunate enough to have accumulated some capital, and Brandon was really excited to kind of get this project started, and we kicked off Brooklyn Cora really in January of 2016, and so. That just starting the company was the beginning of a very long road, but effectively we left our day jobs and started the company in earnest in September, and that's where we got a small like laboratory facility in Bushwick, Brooklyn. All right, so we were in about 300 square feet in an old Pfizer facility. Really doing a bunch of things. So, I mean, supply chain for sake is interesting. So we make a Junmai style of sake. So trying to understand, where are we going to get our rice? Who's going to mill it, right? Is the water in New York City sufficient for us to produce the quality we want? How are we going to make koji? Where are we going to source the mother koji, the Aspergillus oryzae, or other styles of koji that we'll need for our production? And then yeast, and that's just from a core ingredients perspective. Beyond the core ingredients, we need to figure out kind of what our equipment needs were going to be, how we're going to where we're going to locate ourselves, etc. So we spent about a year in that facility, all in preparation of finding a space at Industry City, which is where I am right now.
Nice. Okay.
And Jeff, tell me if this is too elaborate or long a story.
No, it's fascinating because the entrepreneurial part is fascinating to me, and a lot of people have dreams of doing this. So I think it's very interesting. So please continue.
Wonderful. And so, I mean, that process was interesting. We essentially signed a lease at Industry City, started construction on the space. Now, I'm going to flip you guys around. It's a mess in here. It will be amazing. We'll transform this for tonight when we're open to the public. The other thing I'd have to say is we are celebrating World Sake Day today. So we're going to have an event in our tap room with a number of people. I'll walk you guys outside as well. But this space prior to our taking a hammer to it, was this big open industrial space, and we really transformed it to do what we do today. So yeah, that's the story of how we got into this space, and I'm happy to slow down and answer some questions.
So what it comprises a sake making facility that you are? You have like some, I assume some, you have to be super clean in certain areas, and then certain areas where you're serving people, you have a tap room. What does all that comprise?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, the flow of sake making is relatively linear. We start with rice that we either mill ourselves or is milled by a third party, and that part of the facility that's handling the milled rice is a part that doesn't require the same levels of hygiene or cleanliness. And then once that rice has been like rinsed, soaked, and steamed, and I'll show you the part of the facility where we do that, then you wander into this really kind of rigid and clean space, because that's really when you started the sake making process. So we take steamed rice and we make koji with it, and we add it to our fermentation vessel. So you leave this kind of rice handling space and you move into a koji making space. Actually, I can show you guys really quickly.
And what is koji?
So, okay, here, there's Zico putting labels on boxes because today's a bottling day on our koji table. So here, let me do this. I mentioned we make junmai sake, all right?
Yeah.
So really 4 ingredients. So the rice we get is from Arkansas and California, these really incredible farmers that for some reason or another were passionate about things that are Japanese, and decided to challenge themselves and grow sakemai, so sake brewer's rice, for use in American sake production. So that rice, so sake brewer's rice is distinctive because of a centralized starch. That's why when you, Jeff, say something like ginjo or daiginjo, you're really implying the mill rate of the rice that's being used in production. So that rice is an important part of our ingredients. Our batches are about 500 kilograms of rice each, of which 20% is koji. So let's talk about koji briefly. So koji is the mechanism of converting. All right, so rice doesn't have fruit in it like your grapes do, or doesn't have sugar in it like your grapes do. So you need a mechanism to convert the starch in the rice to sugar, and so that's what we grow koji for. So as koji grows on a grain of rice, it's producing enzymes, amylase and protease, and amylase as an enzyme is what we need to convert starch to sugar. So koji you can think about as is the source of sugar in our fermentation.
Oh, wow.
And it's a pretty elaborate process, and I'll show you the room in a moment. And then we have water, so we use New York City tap. We do take some steps to filter and refine it, to remove particles from the old industrial infrastructure. We remove iron and manganese, which are not good things for fermentation. And then we remove chlorine, and that's it. We really maintain the mineral profile of Brooklyn water, which is relatively soft and kind of in line with water that's used in Japanese sake brewing.
Can I ask you, just since you clearly know about New York water, the chlorine, I have like a pure water filter in my faucet, but I always like put a gallon, let it sit for an hour or two, and just let it evaporate. Is that enough? I mean, I'm sure you have to do more, but
yeah, chlorine will evaporate over time. I mean, we force it through a charcoal filter. So I think we try and accelerate, and then we use the water immediately after bringing it to kind of near 0 degrees for our addition. Wow. So we don't have a lot of filtered water just sitting there idle. Sure. It's just used immediately. But a filter should work for you as well.
Okay, cool.
So then the final ingredient, the 4th ingredient, really is yeast. And for domestic sake breweries, it's really challenging to get access to high quality yeast. And there are specific yeast varieties and strains that are used like across Japan in the production. So our access to yeast is really a function of our relationships in Japan and with the Japanese kind of governmental entities that actually produce the yeast for Japanese sake breweries, and it's a testament to how much support and encouragement, and enthusiasm, and level of contribution we get as a non-Japanese producer from Japanese industry, which is remarkable.
Really? They do support you and they share it with you. That's incredible.
I mean, it's astounding how much support we've received from a huge number of breweries. I mean, we're in New York, so we have kind of a biased experience in that, folks that sell sake to the U.S. market from Japan come and visit New York. And then those same folks, when they visit New York, they want to see a domestic sake brewery, which, I mean, we're here for. And so we get that kind of bias as being in New York, which is a large sake market for Japanese producers.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we just develop some really rich relationships with a bunch of breweries, distributors, you name it, and industry people here, and all of which have made it possible for us to produce the quality that we do.
And I'm sure you're turning on a whole new audience to sake that really might not have been open to trying it or have access to high quality, and that's got to be cool for the sake industry.
Yeah, I mean, we want to sell our sake, of course, but I mean, we do. One of the reasons we got into this business is we think sake is this beautiful thing that more people should enjoy more often, and there are practical issues or challenges with it as a product getting to people at a price that they can find it accessible. And so one of the things that we do in our tap room is we really try and simplify the experience, remove some of the ceremony around sake drinking, and just present it as this beautiful, simple thing that took a lot of craftsmanship to create, but can be casually enjoyed anywhere. Mm-hmm.
Now, you mentioned a tap room. When I think of tap room, I think beer on tap. Do you have sake on tap there?
We do. Actually, we sell sake on tap. You go to Ippudo West Side and you can get our sake on tap. There are many other places as well. But yes, at the tap room, we have about 5 sakes on draft, and it's just a fun way to kind of communicate that sake, like fine sake, can be casual. And we serve our sakes chilled in white wine glasses, so you can kind of experience the sake very similarly to the way you would experience a fine wine or a craft beer.
So that's how I experienced your product up in Hudson, and it was such a cool, just like outside, just hanging out and tasting and talking. And could you tell us all of the different, I'm going to say cuvee for lack of a better word, all the different sakes you make?
Yeah, so what you'll find readily available in New York and New York Metro is our namazakes. So we produce 2 primary sakes for broad distribution, though they're super small scale. So we make a Junmai Ginjo, which we call number 14, which is light, floral, aromatic, a very approachable sake, and something that a lot of people think about when they think about the sakes that we make. And then we produce a more subdued, rich, and textured Junmai sake that we call Blue Door, that you can also find. But we have a subscription service, and our subscription service is really geared toward some of our best customers and kind of giving ourselves an excuse to continuously experiment. So in that process, I mean, we make a range of different Junmai Ginjo, and Junmai Daiginjo sakes. A good example of something different and recent is we have this bottle of Sekondi, which is a bottle-conditioned sparkling sake, where the secondary fermentation uses amazake and champagne yeast. And we get some acidity from using citric koji as opposed to yellow koji. And citric koji has citric acid, and so it's got this it's a really dry textured, like fun sake to drink in a different context than you would typically see.
That's wild.
That's cool.
So this is, again, a very, very basic question, but how do you drink sake? You said in a wine glass, but do you have it with food? Do you have it as an aperitif? Do you have it before bed? How do you drink sake?
I mean, mine is intravenously, but one of the things that I always try and avoid is like the complexity, and I am not a san. I tend to drink sake when I want to drink that has alcohol in it, and sake, I mean, because of its low acidity, pairs incredibly well. But I'm really not like the credible expert when to talk about. I mean, I drink our sake with steak and pasta and
Okay.
Mexican food, and you see our sakes at places that are less traditional, that range from, let's say, I mean, Simon and the Whale when it was here, Blue Hill, etc. These are places that aren't presenting like classical Japanese food, and
Hmm.
the umami content, so the amino content and the low acidity make sake a pretty friendly thing to pair with.
That
Um,
makes sense.
that said, I mean, I don't want anyone to walk into a shop and think about buying our sake, but think, oh shit, I don't have a tiny ceramic vessel at home, which is really relevant ceremonially for in the Japanese context, because
Hmm.
it's celebrated to pour for your guest as frequently as possible. So, but that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing in the U.S. And people oftentimes see the ceramic vessels and the clear stuff within and think it's a spirit. Um,
Right.
so, so we want to avoid that and try and kind of make the experience much more similar to craft beer or fine wine.
So can't like I'm gonna dig a little deeper on that. Can I put an ice cube in it? How much alcohol is it? Is it more like drinking a scotch or a beer as a relaxing, or do you sip it? I have so many questions.
Yeah, so you can put an ice cube in it. Some very talented people make cocktails with it.
Okay.
My preference and the purpose and the way we make our sake is really intended for you to drink it on its own, lightly, slightly chilled in a wine glass.
Okay.
And so it is about it. The ABV is about like a bold California red. So it's about
Oh, okay.
15%. So this is not a distilled product. I mean,
Okay.
so this is brewed. It can reach, let's say, 18 plus percent
Hmm.
just through its primary fermentation. I mean, when you come here and you have the opportunity to drink shiboratate, which is stuff fresh from our press, like free run sake from our fermentation process, you'll taste it in its purest form, but it's really very much in the lane of like a fine wine or a craft beer.
Okay. That when you just say it's like the alcohol content of a big red wine, it lets me know how much I can have
Yeah, yeah.
before you're gonna get hammered. Um,
Wow.
let's see. Who distributes you?
So
It's
we work in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania with Skurnik. Actually, so we recently transitioned to Skurnik, and we couldn't be more excited. The team there, Jamie Graves and Ben Bell, are incredibly talented. And if you need anything, anyone listening to this is interested in reaching out to me or about how to find our sake, it's relatively straightforward because we're working with them,
yeah.
which is
Missy Neil is on here, and she's like, I want some. I'm gonna tell her just to text you or her Skurnik rep to find a retail location, but I bet she can get a sample because she does a lot of pairing things now. So
yeah.
it would be
That'd
great to reach out to you. Could you? I know we sort of covered this, but could you? There are some new people on here. Could you go over the process of making sake?
Well, here, let's walk through the
Awesome.
through
If you can, that's great.
it. All right, give me one sec. I'm gonna flip first. Brandon is here, and he's eating a burrito, which is not attractive for Instagram, but it doesn't really matter.
Hi, Brandon. Enjoy.
So, so our sake is delicious, really, because of Brandon. So, which
Oh,
is pretty
great.
cool. So let me walk you guys through, and if I
Awesome.
do this too quickly or in a way that's disorienting, please just let me know. So,
Okay.
hold on. I'm gonna put on some boots,
Oh, wow. Okay.
which
Someone's asking, are you in Chicago yet? I don't think so.
so yeah, actually we are in Chicago in a couple places. So outside of those three states, Vine Connections is an importer distributor that represents us. And in Chicago, if I can find out who the local distributor is,
Okay.
Dave run away. So I'm gonna walk through a bunch of things to kind of put the process in context.
Wow.
Uh, and you could tell there's like quite a bit of stuff. Dave's drinking right now, which is really responsible.
Enjoy,
Uh,
Dave.
Hold on one second, guys. Sorry about that. All right. So we recently expanded our facility to to this new area, and as I mentioned earlier, we get rice milled already in either Minneapolis, Minnesota, or in California. And that rice comes in 50-pound bags, okay? And so when we're ready to kind of put a batch together, which we now do on a weekly basis, that rice gets rinsed with one of our only pieces of Japanese equipment. That little rice washer does about 15 kilograms of rice at a time. And as I mentioned, our batches are about 500 kg.
Wow.
So then, after rinsing, we soak the rice. Sorry if I'm causing people some disorientation.
No, it's great.
All right, so we soak the rice, and we have these little buckets, essentially. So soaking rice is mission critical, also washing. I mean, you don't want any of the residual rice flour from the milling process on the rice as you're preparing sake with it. And that's primarily because you don't want it to clump or group or stick together, so you don't get the uniformity or the kind of consistency in the fermentation.
Okay.
So we soak the rice also to very specific moisture content level based on our application. Are we making koji with it? Are we using it for to directly add it to our fermentation? And then after we soaked it, we let it rest for about 12 hours. And then this barrel right here, which is our kind of steamer, can handle about 300 kilograms of rice at a time and runs for about an hour. So then after steaming, we place the rice on pallets and clean fabric in order to bring it down to temperature because you don't want to add steaming hot rice to our fermentation. So that's really the rice preparation area. It's actually beautiful in here. And at Industry City, people can see us while we work, which is awkward, but also entertaining. So then now I'm going to walk back through this fermentation area. All right, Dave is filtering sake in advance of it being packaged today. So a bunch of new sake to go out into the world. Here's some kegs prior to them being filled.
Wow.
So I mentioned about 20% of our rice goes into koji production. So these boxes, again, we're a small facility, so every space is used to its fullest. But this table under the boxes was designed by, here, let me show you a little piece of it. Hold on a second, Zico. So this table is beautiful, and it was designed by Brandon and built by an artisan in flip this around, and built by an artisan in Industry City. And so just the koji making process is like this focused and really like labor intensive process. So effectively we take steamed rice and then we spread it over the length of the table. And then what we do is we propagate mold spores onto that rice. And as those spores grow, for the first 24 hours, we wrap them up so we get like 100% humidity and drive the heat of that kind of block of rice and koji. So as it grows, it starts producing its own heat. So at about 24 hours, we need to start breaking it up and allowing it to kind of release some of the heat so it doesn't kill itself, and also so we can manage it at very precise temperatures where it's producing amylase for us so that it can be used to convert the starch to sugar in our fermentation.
So those spores is it kind of like a yeast? It's a bacteria that converts starch to sugar.
So it's a fungus that grows, and in order to get its own food out of what it's growing on, it's producing acids and enzymes. Among those enzymes are amylase and protease. The amylase is what you need for starch to sugar conversion. So we spend a huge part of that 48-hour period at a temperature band where that koji is actually producing amylase, because we need that amylase because, like I said, out of 500 kilograms of rice, 400 are just steamed rice. So we need enough amylase produced in our koji making in order to convert the starch in the remaining rice to sugar.
Okay.
So this is a little bit more detailed than
Yeah.
probably necessary. The sake is delicious, and all this complexity is really not meaningful.
No, but wine people are so used to the, you know, the equation of yeast eats sugar and makes alcohol, but you have a whole, and then there's like brewers and making beer, and it's a whole other thing. So it's fascinating, actually.
So let me show you guys really quickly another thing that I mentioned. So I mentioned kind of water filtration. So I'm going to walk over, lean over. So there are our filters, like I mentioned. So we now have koji based on our, we have filtered water that I just showed you. And so the filtered water, koji yeast, and other rice come together in these big fermentation vessels.
Okay.
And those are approximately 1,500 liters. I'm going to try and not break anything or ruin anything while walking over here. I'm going to show you guys really quickly what.
Oh, wow.
So this batch, I mean, if you were here, you'd smell like green apple and cherry. It's actually
Nice.
pretty fantastic. And then this is a different bird's eye view from the brewery and the tap room. Wow, that's intoxicating. So then after our fermentation process, which can last about 30 days, we have to separate the unfermented rice and koji from the clear sake, and that's what this machine does. It's an American version of like a bladder press, which is commonly used in sake production in Japan. So this was actually acquired in like Ohio, and we are in the very near term upgrading to a much larger press in order to kind of hit a slightly quicker and higher volume production cycle. So
Can I go back just a little bit to the tanks? You put your steamed rice, your koji, and then water in there, and then that ferments?
yeah, so it's a little bit more elaborate than that. Actually, it's approximately a 5-day process of building up that fermentation mash, really focusing on the yeast, ensure they have an environment that they are a dominant organism so that you don't get kind of imperfections or quality issues with the final product. And the first part of that, actually, in the style of sake that we make primarily, though we do make some very traditional styles as well, we add a little bit of lactic acid also to ensure that like the yeast is it, and that's all that's really doing its work within the larger fermentation. So the ratios of koji, steamed rice and water vary with each addition, and there are really 3 additions over the 5-day period, and that final addition puts us at about 1,500 liters in volume, which yields about 1,000 liters of sake. So go ahead.
And those tanks are temperature controlled, I assume.
Yes, actually. So this one thing we do, I think, differently than many breweries in Japan, which restrict their brewing season to the winter, where the weather can drive the temperature of the fermentation. That's really sweet. Someone said, "I wish I could fly to New York City now." That's awesome. What I'd say is we were able to use kind of a system to manage the temperatures very precisely, and the temperature profiles. So a lot of our sakes are studies in different temperature profiles and different yeast blends and different koji preparation, and that's really enabled by our detailed control over the fermentation.
And this is just nerd question, but if a tank is getting too warm or something, will you get an alert on your phone? Does that interface with your phone?
Actually, yeah, Brandon has it all.
Amazing.
It's ridiculous, actually.
I love it.
But it's a good anxiety reducer, knowing that you have visibility. So Brandon has an app with the temperatures to his phone, which he
awesome.
does more than he needs to, but that's all right.
That's wild. I think that's super cool, though.
Yeah. And, ultimately, I mean, all this complexity about the production process is one thing, but like I mean, sake is a very simple thing to enjoy.
Yeah.
One of the things I think people practically struggle with is you go to a place, you discover a sake, you love it, but you cannot find it anywhere else.
Right. And then you just, so much of it's in Japanese, you can't even, you don't even know what you had or what you like to go and find it. And it's very confusing. And that's what is really great about yours, because I think it's a good entry for people. If they really want to go crazy, they can. But it's a sake that you can find it. And I got to say, I really, really liked it.
Oh, you're amazing. You're amazing. I mean, we want to encourage people to drink more sake. The craftsmanship and quality of sake coming from Japan is extraordinary. And for folks who really want to get into it, if anyone wants to reach out to me anytime, I'm happy to point them in the directions of shops in New York City or further afield. Awesome. That can give you a good sense of the range and breadth of sake. And sake, so people talk about Junmai Ginjo, Junmai Daiginjo sakes, which I think are meaningful and instructional. But enjoying sake is like enjoying wine or beer, in that if you find a producer you like, right, drink everything they got, right? And they're gonna have like expensive stuff and relatively inexpensive stuff. They're gonna have funky stuff, and they're gonna have kind of more like traditional things. And I think when you find that set of producers, then ordering sake becomes a little easier, or finding your producer becomes a little easier, because it's less of a specific item you're searching for and much more of a book of items. So, yeah. So if we can kind of contribute to more people discovering Japanese sake, I mean, then we've won. And we also have a bunch of talented people out there trying to sell our sake, which folks seem to be enjoying too, which is great.
It's really good. We're at a half hour, so I will let you go. But I just want to ask one more question, and if you have anything else that I didn't ask and you want to say, feel free. But tell me a little bit more about your membership, or it's a club you can join that you can get a sampling each month, or how does that work?
You're amazing. So we have a subscription service. Go onto our site. I mean, and if you have any feedback on how we describe things, just send them my way too. Essentially, we have a 1 month, 3 month, and 6 month subscription. Think of them very much like wine clubs, but the goal is for us to be able to experiment and share with you things that are very limited run and kind of show the range of sake. So, for example, we did a collaboration with New Belgium Brewery. They're huge, but their head brewer, Lauren Limbach, is one of the most talented brewers in the industry, and has a very special sour program. So we did a sour collaboration with them where they used our byproduct as kind of a yeast starter for one of their sour beers. At the same time, we shipped out a Yamahai, which is a traditional method sake that had been oak aged for 4 months in new oak. So these are fun things to try that are different and eccentric, but kind of give you a sense of a bunch of things sake can be.
And just it occurred to me while I asked you this, there's New York State has a thing for like farms that allows New York wineries to ship a little bit differently. You can go and buy the stuff. Are you under that category? So it's kind of like people can go to your shop and buy stuff, and you can just ship those subscription packages directly from the
Exactly. Yeah, so we can ship the packages directly. You can come to our shop. I mean, if you're in Brooklyn, come visit us. I mean, it's a super relaxed experience, and like we have a bunch. I mean, I'll show you the menu really quickly. We have a bunch of stuff on here, and it's more elaborate, but effectively it ranges from exclusive items on draft. We have our Daiginjo on draft right now, which is stunning, and then we have Shiboritate, which are kind of the reason why I get invited to parties, because it's just like it's really tasty.
Awesome.
Yeah,
and your hours and everything are on your website, I assume.
Yep. And we're all reachable all the time, so feel free to connect at any time.
You're really a good educator and clearly a good sake maker, but I really enjoyed learning about this, and everybody else did too. There's a lot of people on here, and a lot of sake people joined here, so you're doing the right thing. Keep it up.
Well, thanks, Jeff, and thanks for this opportunity. This is my first, I think, FaceTime Live, so good. So have a wonderful one, and be safe, and reach out if you need anything. All right.
Thank you. You're so kind. Take care. This was great. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Bye now.